There's a certain irony in being an architect who failed to see the cracks in his own foundation. I built structures meant to withstand hurricanes, yet somehow missed the storm brewing in my own home. If you're listening to this and feeling that something in your life doesn't quite align, I hope my story gives you the courage to investigate those misalignments before they collapse around you. If this resonates with you, please share it to help us grow the Whispered Truths channel. They called us the perfect couple. Ethan and Vanessa Morgan, the methodical architect and the vivacious marketing executive who balanced each other perfectly. We met in our junior year of college when she spilled coffee on my detailed structural design project. While other guys might have lost their temper, I simply calculated the best solution. Redraw the slightly damaged section while getting to know the beautiful woman who couldn't stop apologizing. That was us from the beginning. I was the planner, the foundation. She was the unexpected element, the creative force that made life vibrant. We dated for 3 years before I proposed, making sure our relationship had the proper structural integrity. I'd watched my parents' marriage crumble under financial stress and poor communication. Vanessa and I would be different. We discussed everything: career goals, children, where we'd live, how we'd handle disagreements. When I finally knelt before her on the coastal cliffside where we'd one day build our home, the architectural plans for our future house rolled up in my hand instead of a ring box. Her tears weren't just of joy, but of recognition that this was exactly who we were. The ring was inside the blueprint tube, planning and passion, wrapped into one. We purchased land in a developing coastal area, building our architectural firm with my college roommate Daniel, while Vanessa climbed the corporate ladder at her marketing agency. We lived modestly at first, saving for the house we would build ourselves. Daniel was there through it all, my best man, my business partner, the person who understood my methodical nature and complemented it with his charismatic client relations skills. "You design it, I'll sell it," he'd joke. The trust between us was implicit, cemented through late nights and early struggles. 8 years into our marriage, 5 years into owning our dream home, 3 years into becoming the city's premier architectural firm, that's when the first hairline fracture appeared. It was subtle. Vanessa working later, her phone suddenly password protected. "Client confidentiality," she explained with a slightly defensive tone I'd never heard before. I noted it mentally but didn't dwell. Architects know that materials expand and contract. Relationships have their phases too. Then came changes in her appearance. New clothes, different perfume, a haircut that framed her face beautifully but that she never asked my opinion on. When I mentioned these observations, her response was sharp. "Are you monitoring me now? That's controlling, Ethan." I'd never been called controlling before. I simply noticed details. It was fundamental to my profession and my personality. At work, shifts were occurring too. Daniel began handling more client meetings alone. "You're the genius behind the designs, but these clients need the personal touch," he'd explain. It made logical sense, yet something felt off about the new distribution of our workload. I'd find myself alone at the office more often, with Daniel citing meetings that somehow never appeared on our shared calendar. The most peculiar development was Daniel showing up at our home when I wasn't there. Twice I came home early to find his car in our driveway, with hurried explanations about dropping off documents or discussing a project with Vanessa for her marketing insights. Again, plausible. Vanessa had helped with our branding, but the timing always seemed coincidental. I'm an architect. I don't just design buildings, I solve structural problems. When something doesn't look right in a blueprint, I don't immediately tear it up. I analyze, I evaluate, I look for patterns. So that's what I did with my marriage. I created a spreadsheet. Vanessa's late nights cross-referenced with Daniel's absences from the office. The correlation was undeniable, 82% overlap. Still, correlation isn't causation, a principle that applies to both building integrity and potential infidelity. Then came the definitive crack. During dinner, Daniel mentioned the Italian marble we'd selected for our bathroom renovation. Only I hadn't told him about it. It had been a private discussion between Vanessa and me the previous weekend. "How did he know?" Vanessa quickly interjected, saying she'd mentioned it when asking his opinion on vendors. It was plausible, but the slight tremor in her voice registered like a seismic reading. That night, I lay awake while Vanessa slept, mentally calculating the probability that my wife and best friend were having an affair. The data suggested it, but I needed more information. This wasn't about emotion. It was about structural integrity. Have you ever had that moment when something just doesn't feel right in your relationship? When the familiar patterns suddenly shift? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Sometimes the signs we initially dismiss are the ones we later wish we'd heeded. I installed a security system with mobile notifications. I reviewed our phone records. I hired a private investigator, a decision that felt foreign to my nature but necessary given the stakes. All the while, I maintained my composure. At dinner, I'd ask about her day. At work, I'd collaborate with Daniel on designs. I compartmentalized perfectly, treating the investigation as I would any architectural problem, methodically, dispassionately, thoroughly. 3 weeks later, the investigator delivered his report. It wasn't just an affair, it was a comprehensive betrayal. Photos of them entering hotels together. Text messages revealing 7 months of deception. Rendezvous in our home. Our home that I had designed with the idea that every corner would hold memories of our love. The betrayal was architecturally complete, structurally sound in its deception. But the true devastation came when I discovered their emails. They weren't just having an affair, they were planning my professional and personal demolition. Daniel was systematically transferring client relationships away from me. Vanessa was calculating how to claim half my ownership in the firm during what they referred to as the inevitable divorce. They had blueprinted my destruction with the same precision I used to design earthquake-resistant buildings. That night, I sat alone in my home office, surrounded by the evidence, feeling the weight of it pressing against my chest. I didn't throw things. I didn't scream. Instead, I reached for a blank piece of paper and began to draw, not a building but a plan. If they could design my downfall, I could architect their consequence. The next day, I left supposed evidence of my suspicions where Vanessa would find it, just enough to concern her, not enough to reveal the depth of my knowledge. As predicted, she confronted me that evening, tears streaming, as she confessed to a, quote, momentary indiscretion with Daniel. One time, she claimed. A mistake. She begged forgiveness. I played my role perfectly, hurt, angry, then cautiously open to reconciliation. We should try counseling, I suggested, my voice carefully calibrated to sound wounded yet hopeful. She agreed immediately, relief flooding her features. What Vanessa didn't know was that behind my calm exterior, I was meticulously designing the perfect response, one that would leave both betrayers with absolutely nothing to stand on. For 3 weeks we attended counseling. I spoke about trust and healing while at night I executed my response plan. I reviewed our business contracts, finding a clause Daniel had drafted but never fully read, ironically, a provision that protected the firm against ethical breaches by partners. I quietly transferred our personal assets, documented their continuing affair, yes, even during our reconciliation, and prepared divorce papers with my attorney. At work, Daniel was solicitous, encouraging me to take time for my marriage. Family comes first, he'd say, placing his hand on my shoulder with a concern that made my stomach turn. All while still meeting my wife whenever they thought I was distracted by work or therapy. When everything was in place, contracts revised with key clients, assets secured, evidence organized, I made my move. On a Wednesday morning, I asked Daniel to meet me at the office early for an urgent client matter. I presented him with a comprehensive dossier of his betrayal, including documentation of business ethics violations that constituted breach of contract. You have 2 options, I told him, my voice as level as a perfectly laid foundation. Sign over your share of the firm at a 20% valuation and disappear quietly, or face public exposure, legal action, and professional ruin. His face, usually so confident, crumpled like a failed structural support. He signed the papers with a shaking hand. That same evening, I placed a similar folder before Vanessa at our dining table. Photos, text messages, emails planning their future, and divorce papers citing adultery with irrefutable evidence. I know everything, I said simply. Not just the affair, but the conspiracy. Your carefully planned divorce won't happen the way you expected. These are my terms. They're non-negotiable. Her attempted protest dissolved into sobs when she realized the extent of my knowledge. How long have you known? She finally asked. Long enough to ensure you won't get what you planned for, I answered. Daniel signed away his part of the business this morning. He won't be providing you with the future you discussed in these emails. The aftermath was both vindicating and hollowing. Vanessa moved out the next day, cycling through emotional states like a building under stress. Anger, desperate attempts at reconciliation, depression. She called mutual friends, trying to cultivate sympathy, but the evidence I selectively shared neutralized her efforts. Meanwhile, Daniel's reputation in our professional circle quietly eroded as key clients, sensing the tension, chose to work exclusively with me. The divorce was finalized with terms exactly as I designed. Vanessa received no part of my business and only what was legally required from our other assets. The judge, reviewing the evidence of her premeditated plans to take advantage of me financially, was unsympathetic to her counteroffers. In the months that followed, I experienced what I can only describe as the curious hollowness of a Pyrrhic victory. I had prevailed completely, yet stood alone in a half-empty home designed for a marriage that no longer existed. Has someone's betrayal ever made you stronger in the end? Tell us about your phoenix moment, when you rose from the ashes of deception. For me, that moment came gradually, through the process of rebuilding. I redesigned my home, removing the elements that reminded me of Vanessa. I expanded the firm, hiring 2 talented young architects who brought fresh perspectives. I developed a reputation as the architect of integrity in both my personal and professional life. The loss of my marriage became, ironically, the foundation for a more authentic life. A year after our divorce was finalized, I encountered Vanessa at a mutual friend's wedding. She looked diminished somehow. Her marketing career had stalled after losing connections through our social circle. I learned through others that her relationship with Daniel had imploded months after our divorce. Without the excitement of deception, and without my resources to exploit, they found little to sustain them. She approached me during the reception, wine glass trembling slightly in her hand. "Do you hate me?" she asked, her voice small against the backdrop of celebration. I considered the question seriously, as I would any structural problem. "No," I finally replied. "I couldn't build something new if I was still focused on what collapsed." The surprise in her eyes was followed by something else, the recognition that while she had been defined by our ending, I had transcended it. She nodded once and walked away. We haven't spoken since. Traditional betrayal stories often focus on emotional collapse, the rage, the breakdown, the desperate attempts to salvage what's been broken. But sometimes the strongest response to betrayal is neither rage nor forgiveness, but strategic redesign. When the people I trusted most conspired to dismantle the life I'd built, I chose to see it as a design problem rather than an emotional catastrophe. I won't claim I didn't feel pain. The nights alone in our bed, the memories that ambushed me in unexpected moments, the embarrassment of explaining our situation to friends. But I refused to let those emotions dictate my actions. Instead, I channeled them into meticulous planning, into protecting what I'd built, into ensuring that betrayal would not also mean destruction. 3 years have passed since then. My firm is thriving. I've designed structures across the country, each one a testament to careful planning and integrity. I've even begun dating again, cautiously, thoughtfully, with a woman who appreciates my methodical nature and has earned my gradually given trust. Sometimes I wonder if I should have seen the signs earlier, if there were structural flaws in my marriage that I missed because I was too close to the project. Perhaps. But I prefer to focus on what the experience taught me, that the same qualities that make me a good architect, attention to detail, strategic thinking, patience, made me resilient in the face of betrayal. We all face potential collapse in our lives. A relationship fails. A career stalls. Trust is broken. The question isn't whether these challenges will come, but how we'll respond when they do. Will we be demolished by them, or will we use them as an opportunity to rebuild something stronger, truer, more authentically our own? If there's one thing I've learned as both an architect and a betrayed husband, it's this: Sometimes the most beautiful structures rise from the ruins of what came before. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've experienced something similar, know that you're not alone. And if you're still in the midst of your own collapse, remember that you too can be the architect of what comes next. If my story has touched you or helped you in some way, please subscribe to Whispered Truths. Your support helps us continue sharing stories that remind us all that even after betrayal, rebuilding is possible.